Like I said, any language can be used. It doesn't specifically has to be Arabic. The reason why some people can use Arabic because maybe they are more fluent when they are using it to address to God. Yes, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, I will differentiate as the time goes on. I will show you later on from the examples of the Quran. When people are down, what they say. When people are standing, what they say, right? I will show you that. Good. Now, when we go to chapter 29, verse 45. Now, this part is very interesting, but some people are misunderstanding this concept. And this is where most of these people bring their new meaning, especially people who claim it is following closely. It is not about Salat. This is where they bring their new meaning, right? So God says, "Atlu ma uhiya ilayka min al-kitab wa aqimis salat." That is in chapter 29, verse 45. Then God says, "Inna salata tanha anil fahshahi wal munkar, wa la zikrullahi akbar, wallahu ya'lamu ma tasna'un." What does the verse mean? Let's check the context. So chapter 29, verse 45. Let's see what the verse means. This is a simple issue. It's not complicated. But unfortunately, some people have tried to make this complicated. And let me help. Yeah? Let me help out. So God says, recite what has been inspired to you, Muhammad alayhi salam, of the book, Al-Kitab, and establish the Salat. Now, so you have to recite from the book of God and establish the Salat. So which means the Salat also you are going to do, everything has to come from what you recite from the book. That's how it works. Then God says, Inna salata, indeed the Salat restrains obscenity and abomination. Because you are going to recite things from the book, that thing you are going to recite comes from the remembrance of God. And that thing should restrains obscenity and abomination. Then he says, but the remembrance of God is greater. The zikr of God is greater. Remember, the salat you are establishing is for the remembrance of God. Chapter 20, verse 14. Innani Allah la ilaha illa ana fa'buduni wa kimi salat li zikri. So when you establish your salat, it is for the remembrance of God. So the remembrance of God can only be found in his book. That is where we take the remembrance, the zikr of God, Zikru-Llah. So I'm going to show you the examples, right? The Zikru-Llah, we get it from the book of God. So now this is what happens. Some people misunderstand the concept when he says, Inna salata tanha anil fashai wal munkar. Yes, if you are not doing the salat well, how can it stop you? Because most of the hadith followers and others, they are not doing the correct concept of salat from the Quran. So yes, they will keep doing al-fashahi wal munkar. They can't stop. But if you do the contextual salat God asks you to do, yes, it will stop you. It will refrain you. Right? So now, God didn't say you will refrain. He says the salat is the one refraining you from immorality, that's obscenity and abomination. It is the salat, not you. It is the salat that refrains you. I give an example. Let's say you are going to the bus. When you enter the bus, you need to buy a ticket before you sit down. So when you go to the bus and you want to sit down, the driver say, no, get down. You have to pay before. If you don't pay, you get down. It is not you refraining yourself from sitting. It is the bus driver refraining you from sitting down. So when God says the salat restrains from obscenity and abomination, it doesn't mean automatically you, the believer, when you start doing salat, that means, oh, you stop doing whatever you are doing. No. It is the salat that you are doing because you are reciting verses from the book of God. It is telling you about bad things that you need to stop. So let me help you. Chapter 16, verse 90. Let's see what God says. Chapter 16, verse 90. Let's see what God says in that context, right? 16, verse 90. Remember, the salat you are doing, you are for the remembrance of God. It is because of Allah you are doing the salat, not because of anybody. So look here. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i zi kurba wa yanha anil fashai wal munkar wal baghi. Then he says what? Ya'izukum la'allakum tazakkarun. Now what does the verse mean? It says, indeed, God commands, he commands or calls for or commands to justice, goodness, giving to the relatives. Then he says what? And forbids obscenity and abomination. Now do you see something similar here? Inna salata tanha anil fashahi wal munkar. And here is telling you, He God wa yanha anil fashahi wal munkar. So when you recite the book of God, you always see God stopping you from doing evil, telling you don't do this, don't do this, la takrabu zina, don't do this, don't steal this, don't tell lie, qawl and zura, avoid it, do this, don't do this. You understand? It tells you, wala takhafu ma laysa laka bihi, do not pursue that of which you have. So when you recite from the book of God, all these instructions can be found there. So when God says, Inna salata tanha anil fasha, the salat God has given you, it is for the recitation of the verses of God and reading the verses of God. For you, the believer, whenever you are establishing the salat and studying the book of God, that stops you, that will refrain you from the obscenity and abomination. Do you get the concept? Good. This is why a lot of the hadithiyun, when they go to their salat, most of the people at the back in the salat, they don't understand what the imam is saying. So even the imam says la takrabu zina, somebody just standing says Ameen, he has no idea what is being told. Do you get my point? So the salat, you need to know what you are being told. That's why he says wala takrabu salata anta sukara atta ta'lamu ma taqulun, so that you know what you are saying. So when you go to a salat and you are even reciting Arabic and you don't know what you are saying, it's better you don't do salat anymore. Because why will you be reciting something you don't know? You understand? It's just like you are intoxicated. Do you get my point? So chapter 16 verse 90, we can see God himself, he forbids what? Obscenity and abomination, munkar, and then oppression. So in the salat, since you are doing the zikr of God, it is the book you use for the remembrance of God. So to make this easy for you, I'm taking you to the verses to show you how God forbids that from the salat. So now, when we go to chapter 7, verse 33, let's see what God says. Chapter 7, Surah Al-Araf, verse 33. Yeah, chapter 7, verse 33. So God says, Kul, innama harrama rabbi al-fawahisha ma zahara minha wa ma batana. Then he says, wal ithma, wal bagiya bi ghayr al-haq, wa an tushriku billahi ma lam yunazzil bihi sultan, wa an taqulu ala Allahi ma la ta'lamun. What does the verse mean? It says, say, my Lord only forbids obscenities. You remember, inna salata tanha anil fashahi wal munkar. Inna salata tanha anil fashahi wal munkar. The salat, why do we establish salat? We establish salat for the remembrance of God. Where can we find the remembrance of God? In the book of God. So I'm going to show you where we find the remembrance of God. The Zikru-Llah. Where do we find it? In the Koran. So I'm going to help you. My Lord only forbids obscenities, what is apparent thereof and what is forbidden of sin, and oppression without right, and to associate others with God for which he has not sent down any authority, and to say what you do not know about God. It is forbidden by God. So when you attend the salat, in the salat you'll be told all this. Because every day, if it is a congregational salat, the leader will recite the verses to you and tell you what God likes and what he doesn't like, what is haram and what is not haram. Do you get the point? So say, my Lord only forbids obscenities. So through the verses of God, we can know God forbids. So in the salat, when we go to the salat, we'll be told all these things. That is in the group salat. Now, we continue. When I take you to chapter 57, verse 16, this is where the answer itself is. Chapter 57, verse 16. Now see what God says. Suratul Hadid. Then I take you to verse 16. Now check for yourself what God says in this verse. He's talking to the believers, right? Now, when a believer attends the salat, there is something God is expecting from you. So God says, is it not time for those who have believed to humble their hearts to the Zikru-Llah? Alam ya'ani lillazina amanu an yakhsha'a qulubuhum li Zikru-Llahi wama nazala min al-haqq wala yakunu kallazina utul kitaba min qabl fatala alayhim amadu fakasat qulubuhum wa kathirun minhum fasikun. The verse is saying, is it not time for those who have believed to humble their hearts to the remembrance of God, to the Zikru-Llah? Remember, chapter 29, verse 45, he says, Wala Zikru-Llah Akbar. And for the remembrance of God is greater. You need to remember God more, what he tells you not to do, or what is haram, what is that. So in the Salat, you'll be told all this. So chapter 57, verse 16, God is saying, is it not time for those who have believed to humble their hearts to the remembrance of God and what he has revealed of the truth? You understand? So since we are going to use the book of God for the Salat, that same book will tell you what is forbidden and what is not forbidden and what is abomination. He will tell you everything in the Salat. So when he says, Inna salata tanha anil fashahi wal munkar, it doesn't mean automatically, if I'm establisher of the Salat, I will stop doing immorality and obscenity. No. It will take you time. That's why God is talking to the believers in chapter 57, verse 16. Is it not time for those who have believed to humble their hearts? You can be a believer, but you haven't humbled your hearts to the verses of God. You don't know. So if automatically God says, Inna salat tanha anil fashal wal munkar, you are expecting that the Salat straight. Salat will forbid you from that, but it doesn't mean you, the human being, if you are not ready to humble your heart, it will never change you. Good. So let's continue. So similarly, when you go to chapter 3, verse 113, among the people of the book, there are those who stand, ka'imot. They stand at night reciting the verses of God and they do sujud, they prostrate. Yeah? They prostrate. Now in the night, reciting the verses of God, it has a different context. You can recite the verses of God when you are studying for yourself in the night. Just like God told the prophet to do in chapter 73, verse 2 to verse 6. Yeah, God told the prophet to do the same. You can, where he says, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا إِنَّ سَلُوكَ عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. You can be reading or reciting the Quran for yourself or to yourself. It doesn't mean you are reciting it to God. Then after that, you can prostrate and then glorify God. That is allowed.